Welcome to this special edition of Hub Hits. I'm Harrison Lohman, managing editor of The Hub. I'm so pleased to be interviewing Pamela Cross today. She's the author of And Sometimes They Kill You, Confronting the Epidemic of Intimate Partner Violence. Her book has been shortlisted for the Donner Prize this year. The Hub is happy to be partnering with the Donner Canadian Foundation, spotlighting the 5 shortlisted titles and their authors in this series on YouTube. Pamela, thank you very much for joining us on Hub Hits today. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks for the invitation.
As I said, my first question is going to be, where did the book title come from? And Sometimes They Kill You. Can you explain that to our viewers?
In May of 2022, I was holding community consultations in Renfrew County, Ontario, just before an inquest into the murders of 3 women that had taken place in that county 7 years earlier began. At one of those consultations, a woman who facilitated a girls' empowerment group talked to me about the impact that the murders had had on the girls in her group. At the first meeting they held in the fall of 2015, after the murders had taken place, they were talking obviously about what had happened, and they were talking about relationships where people had conflict. They were talking about relationships where one person was abusive to the other. And one of the girls in the group, who the leader described to me as being about 12 years old, just looked at her and said, "Yeah, I know. Sometimes they argue with you and sometimes they kill you." It just struck me as such a chilling assessment by somebody so young of what can go on in a relationship where one partner is being abused by the other. As I started working on the book, I thought, that's it. That's what I want to call this book. It's true. Sometimes they do kill you. As someone said when I was speaking about my book recently, and sometimes they don't, which is also, of course, very true. But the fact of the matter is that far too many women are killed by their partners or former partners in this country because sometimes they kill you.
Mm-hmm. The stakes are that high. There's lives on the line. Can you give our viewers a sense of how serious, how big an issue this is in Canada when it comes to domestic violence, intimate partner violence?
There's so many different words. The book is primarily about intimate partner violence, which is abuse of one partner by the other. But we also do hear words, as you've said, like domestic violence, violence against women, family violence. Those are all somewhat broader titles that encompass abuse that happens within a family, not necessarily just by one partner of the other partner. My work has focused on intimate partner violence. And so obviously that's what I know the most about. We do know that in this country, probably over 40% of women have at some time been subjected to abuse by their partner. We also know that women are killed in horrifying numbers. One woman approximately every 6 days across the country is killed by her partner or her former partner. So think about this. This is somebody who at one time said he loved her. 1 every 6 days. If we look at women killed by men, the number is a lot higher. It's 1 every 2 days, I think. But if we stick to intimate partner violence, that's the number we have. I want to add one other statistic too, and it's this one. And here I'm commenting on Ontario specifically because that's where I work, and I sit on Ontario's Domestic Violence Death Review Committee, where we look at these deaths in some detail. What we've seen in the last few years is a staggering increase in the number of situations in which women are killed by their adult sons or sons-in-law.
Really?
These are no doubt young men who grew up in a home where they witnessed their father abusing their mother, and now as young men, they kill their mother.
Oh, gosh. Can you give us a sense of a case or two that's really stuck with you, perhaps from your book, that you feel has really left a mark and gives us a window into the larger story around intimate partner violence?
One of the stories that has stuck with me the most, and I have to tell you, they all do. They all make their way into your heart and into your gut. They don't just disappear because you're not working with the woman anymore. But one that will always be with me is the woman who was, in fact, my very first client when I opened my practice as a lawyer. She came into my office literally on the day that I opened my law practice. So you can imagine this. I'm a brand new lawyer, haven't had any clients yet. A woman runs into my office holding her baby, and she says, "You have to help me. I ran out of the house with the baby, but my husband's still in the house with my son and he's got a gun. That woman had left a relationship where there was considerable abuse. We were able to retrieve her other child from the house, and then over the next several months, we were able to get orders through family court that kept her and her children much safer than they had been before. Of course, I don't know the end to her story. Once she didn't need me for her family law case anymore, she disappeared from my life. I like to think that she went on to have a life in which she and her children lived free from violence and abuse. But I learned so much from that client about the ways in which laws that are intended to protect women and their children really don't do a very good job of that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm picking her as one of the most memorable cases in all of the work that I've done, because really it was meeting her and working with her that made me realize how much we needed to do in the area of public policy and law reform if we were to properly respond to intimate partner violence, and then a little more idealistically, if we were going to be able to actually end that violence, stop it from happening in the first place.
Just before we move into the legal system and how it's responded to all these cases you've mentioned, can you give our viewers a sense of, these are partners who profess their love to this person on their wedding day? Is someone who, swore to protect them. How does it go from that to then, this partner threatening or succeeding in ending the life of this very person that they once loved? How do we cross that path?
That's not an easy question to answer, but I'll do my best. I think, first of all, it's important to understand it's not really like a line is crossed. One day this person loves their partner, the next day they don't. Often those who cause harm continue to love the person they're harming. And so it's a very complex dynamic that's operating. We know that violence within families, gender-based violence more broadly, is rooted in systemic misogyny, sexism, inequality for women. We know that poverty, that uncertainty, things like folks who are newcomers to Canada and who have immigration uncertainty, really uncertainty of any kind, all of these factors can contribute. They don't cause the abuse, but they can contribute to situations where the abuse may escalate. So if you think about a family where there are serious economic challenges, there's perhaps been a pattern of abuse by the husband towards the wife, or the man towards the woman. Of course, people don't have to be married. Suddenly he loses his job. And whatever self-esteem he may have had, his sense that he was providing for his family, that's been taken away from him. Uh-huh. Or think about a crisis like the COVID pandemic, where in order to curtail the spread of that virus, we all lived under stay-at-home orders. Well, for most of us, that was annoying or irritating. But in families where there had been a pattern of abuse, the abuse now escalated because those two people were never apart from one another. She couldn't take the kids and go to the library for a few hours if she could see that he was working up to what might have been a violent episode. She couldn't go and visit her parents with the kids for a weekend. These people, already living in a situation where there was a dynamic of abuse by one partner towards the other, were suddenly forced to be together all of the time. So there can be outside triggers, but really at the heart, this abuse happens because we still have misogyny. We're surrounded by misogyny. And in many ways, we let it happen.
Let me just move into the legal system here in terms of how it's responded to this. I'm wondering how you sort of would grade that. Looking at the legal system as well as potential solutions, I note that there's discussions in the communities you operate in about making something called coercive control, criminalizing that. Can you give me a sense, A, of how you would say the Canadian legal system is reacting to the horrors you just described, and B, what those solutions might look like?
I wouldn't give either the family or the criminal legal system a passing grade when it comes to how they respond to violence that happens within families. Certainly there have been improvements. Obviously there have been many, many improvements, but the rate of violence seems to be pretty steady. And so that tells me the systems that people turn to really aren't helping them. And that's what I hear from women. They don't want to report that their partner has assaulted them to the police because they don't want to lose the breadwinner for the family, because they're worried that it will affect their partner's immigration status, because they're an Indigenous woman and they worry that they won't be believed, because they're afraid of their partner. And they're afraid that if they tell anybody about what's happened, including the police, that will lead to an escalation of abuse. And in many cases, they don't want to call the police because they still love their partner. They want the abuse to stop, but they don't want their partner taken away. They don't want their children losing their father. So first of all, we have this vast number of women who never tell the police, so the criminal system doesn't even get involved. Where it does get involved, it's a process that's designed to fail, as far as I'm concerned, from the bail process right through to, if there even is a trial, the trial and the outcome of the trial. Women are not believed. The standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is something that I believe fiercely in, is just not workable in a situation where there's not likely to be any other witnesses to what has happened. I could talk all day about the criminal system, but let me just make a couple of comments about the family law system, because any woman with children who leaves a relationship where she was abused is going to be engaging with that system. It really does not understand the extent to which abuse continues after separation. It doesn't end just because she moves out or tells him to move out. In fact, it escalates. Mm-hmm. And we know from domestic violence death review committees across the country that it's the point of separation when a woman is at the greatest risk of being killed by her partner. And so a restraining order from family court, a piece of paper that says to him, you're not allowed to go to her house, isn't that helpful. If he's prepared to kill her, he's not going to be worried about breaching a restraining order. Shared parenting arrangements don't work where one parent is there for the purpose of bullying the other parent rather than out of a genuine interest in being engaged with helping to raise their children. So both systems get a failing grade. And I will say that changes that have happened because communities have organized, because violence against women workers and survivors have organized. So we have to keep doing that kind of work if we want to see the changes that we still need to see.
Well, this is basically touching on my last question, Pamela, which is, how do you remain optimistic amongst all the, sort of the darkness you've just described? What confidence do you have, and what do you focus on to be able to get up for work every day?
I would say that my optimism, I would call it hopefulness rather than optimism. I'm not sure if there's a difference in the dictionary between what those two words mean. But I would say my hopefulness comes from two places. First of all, it comes from the strength and courage of the many women I've worked with who have survived intimate partner violence, who have found a way to get out of a relationship where they were being abused, have kept their children safe, and have gone on to live lives free from that kind of abuse. But I also draw hope from the violence against women movement, the frontline advocates who work in that movement, because we have affected change in the past. We've seen changes to criminal laws that, while the criminal law is still not adequate, it's better than it was. And we've seen changes to family laws. We've seen changes to government policies. We've seen increased public awareness. And so that's what gives me the hope that keeps me from, just rolling over and pulling the blankets up over my head in despair, which it would be easy to do as well. But I really think that if Canadians as a whole engage with this issue, understand how serious it is, we are able to make the changes we need to make.
Mm-hmm. That is Pamela Cross. She is the author of And Sometimes They Kill You, Confronting the Epidemic of Intimate Partner Violence. And her book has been shortlisted for the Donner Prize this year. Thanks so much for joining us, Pamela. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Harrison.